Mr. Donut is Japan's biggest donut franchise. So big, in fact, they ran Dunkin Donuts right out of the whole country back in the 1990s. It's okay, Dunkies. You'll always be welcome with Ben Affleck. Trouncing the biggest player in America's donut industry at their own game is pretty impressive for a Japanese upstart, but it turns out Mr. Donut isn't actually Japanese. So, today we're peeking behind the curtain about how Mr. Donut is secretly American. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other snack food chains you would like to hear about. Okay? Someone call Homer Simpson? Actually, on second thought, maybe not. Given how dominant they are in Japan's donut market, it's easy to imagine that Mr. Donut is some Japanese businessman's answer to Dunkin Donuts. But that's only half right. Mr. Donut was some businessman's answer to Dunkin Donuts. But that businessman was from Boston, and he definitely was not Japanese. Way back in 1955, Harry Weinecker was working at Dunkin Donuts with his brother-in-law, William Rosenberg, who also just happened to be the founder of the company. Rosenberg wanted to expand by licensing out Dunkin Donuts franchises. But Weinecker thought it was a bad idea, so he quit his job and started his own competing donut business called Mr. Donut. Mr. Donut opened its first location in Revere, Massachusetts, and soon had a handful more, including one in nearby Weymouth, Massachusetts. The chain quickly became popular for its donuts and coffee, which fans insisted were far superior to Dunkin's, as well as the friendly chef guy wearing a mustache, hat, and bow tie featured in its logo and signage. With all that success, old Harry had a change of heart about the wisdom of franchising, and he started selling Mr. Donut franchises as fast as he could. By 1965, the company had almost 200 locations across 30 U.S. states and Canada, and they were already working on opening their first European location in England. The chain would eventually peak at about 550 locations, before beginning to lose popularity and market share to its chief competitor in the 1980s. In 1970, however, Weinecker sold the company to the dryly named International Multi-Food Corporations, which immediately set out to make it Dunkin Donuts' largest global competitor. So when Dunkin Donuts opened up shop in Japan in 1970, Mr. Donut wasn't going to be far behind. The first Japanese Mr. Donut opened up in Mino, Osaka Prefecture in 1971, but the Japanese location was notably different from its American counterparts in a number of ways, and there was a reason for that. You see, when Weinecker decided to enter the Japanese market, he did it by franchising the rights to a Japanese corporation called Dunkin Company Limited. Weinecker may have expected the Japanese locations to be identical to the American ones, but Dunkin had other plans. Before the first Mr. Donut was opened in Japan, Keiji Chiba, the general manager and director of Dunkin's Food Industries, had a replica location built inside a warehouse. He then invited his salespeople to visit it, try some of the food, and just generally see what they thought of it. And it turned out to be a great idea, because what they thought was not good. According to Chiba, they thought the counters were too high, the chairs were too wide, the coffee cups were too heavy, and the donuts were too large and tasted funny. Too much nutmeg for the Japanese palate. Chiba decided to re-engineer the franchise from the ground up. That included not just a new menu, but a whole new aesthetic modeled on trendy Seattle coffee shops. At the time, the Japanese thought of donuts as a kid's food, but Chiba planned to remake the pastry's image by giving Mr. Donut locations a high-class atmosphere, not like those gauche donuts at Dunkies. And where Dunkin Donuts placed their Japanese locations in big cities, Chiba put his Mr. Donuts in the suburbs. He also launched a series of advertising campaigns that starred popular comedians, and the results were fairly astounding. Over the next 2 decades, Mr. Donut was slowly squeezed out of the American market by companies like Dunkin Donuts and Starbucks. It got so bad that by 1990, Mr. Donut had to sell all of its American locations to the British corporate behemoth Allied Lions plc, who also just happens to own Dunkin Donuts. Naturally, the company quickly rebranded most of the American Mr. Donuts as Dunkin locations. All the non-American locations were essentially spun off into their own independent businesses, which in essence made the Japanese Mr. Donut a Japanese company. But back in Japan, everything was wine and roses, or coffee and donuts, I guess. Mr. Donut came out on top, with Dunkin Donuts ultimately doing so badly in Japan, it decided to withdraw from the country entirely in 1998. Meanwhile, Mr. Donut now has over 1,100 Japanese locations, and counting. One of the reasons Mr. Donut is so popular in Japan is because of how much people love their pondering donuts. If you're the kind of person who keeps track of the latest food trends on Instagram, you may recognize the pondering as a cousin of the Mochi donut, a food trend that started taking off on the social media network around 2019. And if you're not that kind of person, for instance, if you enjoy eating your food more than photographing it, don't worry, we'll bring you up to speed. Mochi donuts are a type of donut descended from both the regular old American donut and Japanese mochi. Mochi is a Japanese rice cake made from a short-grained japonica glutinous rice called mochigome, as well as sugar, water, and cornstarch. Like the Mr. Donut chain, a lot of fans assume that mochi donuts are Japanese in origin, but that's not quite the case. In a way, mochi donuts are as American as apple pie, just like Mr. Donut itself. Their origin story actually starts in Hawaii, where mochi made its way from Japan via plantation workers in the 1800s. Fast forward to 1992, when a woman named Charmaine Okazik started frying up a blend of poi, or mashed taro, and mochi, which she called poi mochi. She sold balls of the stuff out of her parents' garage in Waianae, and they became extremely popular. Poi mochi was so popular, in fact, it inspired Mr. Donut to introduce their own version, called Pão de Ring Donuts, in 2003. Named for pão de queijo, a Brazilian cheese bread that has a similar appearance, Pão de Ring donuts were shaped like a ring of 8 little balls. In 2016, a Hawaiian bakery chain called Liliha Bakery copied their look for their own mochi donut line. The eye-catching pastries would eventually blow up on social media, laying the groundwork for the Instagram trend. Ironically, while pão de rings are often called mochi donuts, they technically aren't. In fact, they're made with a combination of wheat and tapioca flour, and they actually don't contain any mochi at all. So why do people call them mochi donuts? It's because their texture, which the Japanese refer to as mochi mochi, is very similar. Mr. Donut's pão de rings initially came just in a basic sugar-glazed flavor, but thanks to their popularity, the company quickly branched out. Today, pão de rings come in pão de cocoto, which is dusted with brown sugar, pão de strawberry, which is topped with a strawberry glaze, pão de chocolat, which is made with a chocolate dough, and pão de angel, a cream-filled version. They also come in numerous limited edition and seasonal flavors, and Mr. Donut has been known to collaborate with famous chefs and brands to create special edition versions. For example, in 2020, they teamed up with French pastry chef and chocolatier Pierre Hermé to create the Pão de Espion, a pink donut made with rose, raspberry, and lychee. The Pão de Ring line is so popular, it even has its own mascot, the Pão de Lion, a friendly little lion with a Pão de Ring donut for a mane. He's so beloved in Japan, he appears in a slew of Mr. Donut merchandise, and from time to time the company releases a special Pão de Lion donut in his honor. No word on whether it is lion-flavored. Mr. Donut is all but a memory in America today, and Dunkin Donuts is still the clear donut champ. The time to make the Donuts guy and Ben Affleck make a persuasive duo. Competitors like Tim Hortons, Krispy Kreme, and Shipley Donuts are nipping at Dunkies' heels. But meanwhile, Mr. Donut is dominant overseas. In fact, the company has more than 5,500 locations worldwide. Yes, a lot of those locations are in Japan, but you'll also find Mr. Donut in places like China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam. They also have locations in Canada, England, and El Salvador. And if you drop in on one, you'll see Mr. Donut's current menu is still built around coffee and donuts, of course. But they also serve plenty of other foods like croissants, Danish pastries, bagels, bread loaves, turnovers, rolls, muffins, cookies, sandwiches, noodle soups, and even hamburgers. You're also likely to find different selections localized to each location, depending on the country it happens to be in. The El Salvadorian Mr. Donuts, for example, pride themselves on serving local favorites like pupusas and tamales. And in Thailand, you'll find special sushi-themed donuts called sushi dough, though it's worth pointing out they only look like sushi. There's not a raw fish in them. You're probably wondering whether there are any traces of this once great franchise left in its original home. The answer is yes. Mr. Donut still has one single location in the United States. If you're in the U.S. and you're determined to visit it, you'll find it at 2720 Groveland Street in Godfrey, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis. It's owned by Cesar Blanco, who returned to the States after serving 25 years in the military, and was shocked to find his favorite donut franchise was all but extinct. He bought the location in 2004 and quickly set out to to restore it to its former glory, and that's why it's still there today. This location is even more unique than it sounds, since it still serves Mr. Donut's original pre-Japan expansion-style donuts, made from the original recipes. So while you won't find any pondering donuts or chocolate-covered French crullers at the Godfrey Mr. Donut, their menu offers classic comforts like homemade cinnamon rolls, long johns, apple fritters, twists, biscuits and gravy, and of course, fresh coffee. The Godfrey Mr. Donuts has become something of a tourist attraction. It is a popular destination for people nostalgic about Mr. Donuts, but ironically, it's also become something of a must-see site for Japanese tourists, curious to see the roots of the franchise. Completists may also want to drop in one of the few locations of the Donut Connection franchise. Why? Well, when Dunkin took over Mr. Donut's American locations, a handful were too close to existing Dunkin locations to rebrand them as Dunkins without cannibalizing their own customer base. Those locations banded together and became Donut Connection, some of which maintained their original Mr. Donut atmosphere by keeping the original fixtures and decor. Otherwise, all traces of Mr. Donut's American heritage have been wiped away like delicious sandcastles. But have you tried a pain de chocolat? Totally worth it. So what do you think? Have you ever eaten at a Mr. Donut? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other weird history food videos.